Welcome into the best in paranormal programming. This is Darkness Radio. I'm your host, Tim Dennis. Got a good show for you today, folks. You know, every once in a while we get a topic here on this show that makes you go, huh? This is one of those days. I'm not going to lie to you. This is one of those days you're gonna say to yourself, are you serious, Tim? Is this for real? This is for real, folks. And not only for real, but I tell you, this is intriguing. This is one of those topics where I've been talking with our guest, Paul Blake Smith, about this for quite a while and known that he was going to write these books and been excited to get him on the show. We're going to talk about two of his books today. He had one of these books out in 2020, 2021 called President Eisenhower's Close Encounters. And yes, it's about President Eisenhower and how he met with, well, let's just call it what it is. He met with aliens. We'll tell you about that in the first part of the program. Second part of the program is about a brand new book that is out there that we're excited to tell you about. It's called the Nixon-Gleason Alien Encounter. And it's just that. Maybe you've heard about the story of the time that President Nixon was in Florida on vacation and took Jackie Gleason to an Air Force base, I believe it was an Air Force base, to show him 4 dead alien bodies. We're going to expound on that and tell you about that. But first, let me introduce our guest for today, and we'll get into this straight away. Paul Blake Smith is the sole author of the Nixon-Gleason Alien Encounter, just as he was with President Eisenhower's Close Encounters, both from foundationbooks.net. The first one was a bestseller with over 130 positive reviews from Amazon.com, got 4.5 stars out of 5, and has earned an audiobook deal with Tantor.com. Paul previously authored the popular nonfiction books MO41, The Bombshell Before Roswell, the case for a Missouri 1941 UFO crash. You may remember Paul being on the show talking about that book. And 3 Presidents, 2 Accidents, more MO41 UFO crash data and surprises, released at opposite ends of 2016 by Argus Books. This is Paul's 5th nonfiction UFO book and his 7th book overall. Paul was a 4-year mass communications major with an English minor at Southeast Missouri University in his hometown of Cape Girardeau, Missouri, which, by the way, I almost started my radio career in Cape Girardeau. I think we talked about that when he was on the show last. A fan of history, sports, and the paranormal. By the way, he's a Vikings fan. I love him for that. Paul spends his day writing mostly nonfiction books and can be found on the internet through his website, www.mo41.info. He's on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Pinterest, plus the 2 publishing websites, and we will put those in the description of this show. Let's welcome into Darkness Radio, Paul Blake Smith. Hi, Paul. How you doing?
I'm doing just fine. I hope you're all doing the same, and that was a good intro because they are 2 amazing stories. The Eisenhower tale, just like you, my first reaction was, oh, come on, man, you got to be kidding me. The President of the United States met with aliens. And I always wanted to know more about that subject. And I kept looking for years. It'd be just little dribs and drabs and paragraphs in books.
Yeah.
And I thought someone needs to investigate this, research it, and do a whole book. And that turned out to be me. So it came out really well. It's got hundreds of good reviews on Amazon. It's considered an Amazon bestseller. And so I created this sequel about Nixon, who was Eisenhower's vice president, and the thing that he did at an Air Force base. We'll put the whole thing together as we go along here.
Sure. Let me ask you this, Paul. What's the most violent reaction you got initially when you're talking about putting together the President Eisenhower's Close Encounters, and you tell somebody, I'm writing this book about President Eisenhower meeting with aliens? When I say violent, I don't mean physically, but what's the most violent reaction you get from somebody when you tell them the subject matter you're writing about?
From UFO people and interviewers like you. Some of them are like, oh, yeah, I've heard this before, and I'm so glad you wrote this book. Is this the coolest story ever? A president and aliens. And you think, well, come on now. But let me backtrack just a bit. In the last year or so, there have been articles online about scientists who now reasonably believe there are a lot of Earth-like planets in the cosmos developing human-like beings, or just human beings like us. There may be slight differences.
Mm-hmm.
And it's still speculative. These are very serious, like Cambridge-type university cosmologists and scientists, where President Eisenhower supposedly had approved of a communications program with some, he was told, friendly extraterrestrials, and that they wanted to meet him in person. And so they set it up way out in California at Edwards Air Force Base. And he flew 2,700 miles to go on a, quote, golf vacation.
Okay.
And he did do some golfing out there. But on February 19th, that's the key day, 1954, it was a Friday night, he left his golf vacation, snuck out of town, took a short flight to Edwards Air Force Base, where these aliens had landed. And they were said to be very much like humans. Just like these recent stories say, that they were slight differences.
Well, let me stop you right there, Paul.
Okay.
Okay, so he gets on a plane, goes to Edwards Air Force Base, where there's reportedly aliens. They look human. Now, in our realm, that when we talk about aliens, we're told that there's certain amounts or certain types of aliens. The ones that we hear about that are the most humanoids are these blondes that we hear about, these tall blondes. Are these the ones that President Eisenhower are meeting with, the most humanoid type?
I find that at least possible. However, there was a test pilot for the United States Air Force who spoke up and told this tale in 1981 or 2, I think it was 82. And he said, I don't want this story to die out. I found out I'm the last man left alive from this group, and I'm going to tell you the whole thing. But he wanted his name kept out of it. Okay. We'll call him Chuck. Chuck said he was brought in for his knowledge of aerodynamics, his knowledge of airplanes and jet thrust engines and such. Mm-hmm. So he said, I was there with Eisenhower. The aliens had landed that afternoon and were thoroughly debriefed by Air Force officials at the base, a kind of welcoming committee, to make sure there's no evil intent, that they are unarmed and harmless and friendly, and they were. So the call went out to Eisenhower, and he approved. He was a very courageous man. He was an Army general, like 4 or 5 stars, and he led the troops to victory in Europe during World War II. He wasn't afraid of anything, but he did make sure his people checked it out. So when he got there, they spoke English to him at the edge of a runway. Eisenhower was standing just inside an airplane hangar, a jet hangar, at night, where no one, would be around for like maybe 20, 30 miles out in the middle of the desert, surrounded by mountains. It was the most top security arrangement they could come up with. Okay. Supposedly there were movie cameras, like newsreel type cameras, recording the entire event. One source says that there's black and white footage of it, and another says there's color footage. The black and white footage, I think, ended abruptly because the technology of the aliens, they put on a little demonstration of their craft on the runway, and it clashed with the technology of the camera and broke it. So it stops like halfway from what I read.
Okay. Interesting.
The aliens were very concerned about Eisenhower's atomic testing program. They didn't like all the radiation and nuclear contamination in our air, our land, and our sea, and they practically begged him, stop doing this. And he said, well, I'm not going to disarm unilaterally, and we have to test the power of these things to know what we've got. So there was a bit of a stalemate, but he said, you are so advanced, we can't stop you, but could you please not start a panic? The test pilot says that was Eisenhower's main concern. Don't start social disorder like setting down in a crowded city or landing on, the White House lawn or the Capitol lawn and getting out and talking to people. He asked them to stay aloof. And they agreed, and they put on a demonstration of their craft. There were 3 circular ships and 2 elongated or cigar-shaped craft that had landed on the runway at Edwards. And they said the pilot and the 6 bodyguards around Eisenhower and the president were suitably impressed. But then the aliens may have overplayed their hand. They were so friendly, they wanted to begin an education program for people of Earth to let them know there are many races in the cosmos, and that was just one. Mm-hmm. And, people weren't thinking too much along those lines back then. So they demonstrated something that really caused Eisenhower great discomfort, according to the test pilot. They gave a demonstration of their ability to cloak themselves. They went naked or invisible to the naked eye, not naked to the invisible eye.
Sure.
They made themselves disappear and reappeared in slightly different places on the runway to show how this could be done. Eisenhower was just aghast. He said, "Our world is not ready for this. You're going to have to go." It was over our heads.
What?
Can you imagine aliens, as friendly as they are, teaching this ability to cloak yourself to spies, murderers, rapists, thieves, people who have nefarious plans in life? Eisenhower had seen a lot of misconduct, misbehavior in World War II and Nazi Germany, and people with power run amok. And he said, "You're going to have to go." And they eventually did that night. So he got back in his plane and flew back to Palm Springs. Before he did, he gathered all the men at the base and swore them to secrecy. And the test pilot said, "I was the last person in the group alive as far as I know. I'm going to break my oath and tell this story so that the world will know that it really did happen." So I got that story as the basis, and I found all kinds of circumstantial evidence, secondhand stories, I'll admit, but things that confirmed it over and over and over again. Even Frank Edwards, a paranormal type broadcaster, a news broadcaster in his day, reported the story in the spring of '54, and it was in a few books back then. It was in an October 1954 Valor magazine article in which they interviewed some people who said, "Yeah, Eisenhower came to the base and there was extraterrestrial stuff going on." And somehow this kind of just got ignored or hushed up, or the government wasn't too thrilled. Frank Edwards lost his job. He got fired shortly thereafter for talking about this on the air, I'm sure. And the story just kind of melted away as the 50s and 60s went on. And it's just as fascinating and intriguing as can be. And I put together as many little scraps and pieces of information. Now that the book is out, someone has presented some data from Frank Scully, I think his name.
Okay.
It was an author, and he had also looked into this and found that it may well be true that Eisenhower did duck out of his golf vacation and went over to Edwards Air Force Base. There were a few different people over the years that say they've seen the photographs or still images from the film footage taken. There were cameramen operating film to record the event within the hangar. I think that was partly in case anything went wrong, like if they were a Trojan horse, they'd have some sort of, proof. Right. Just to record it. I'd love to see that get leaked.
Right.
Let somebody on the internet hack into that, or the government leak that, and that would be amazing. There were a number of people who said the information was taken by the Archbishop of the Western part of America, Francis McIntyre, all the way to the Pope in the Vatican, and that he found out about it, and that the Vatican may well have known from a few other sources, but that this is not a joke, that they were all told to keep this quiet. We don't want to start a panic, like the 1938 War of the Worlds radio broadcast, where people heard that aliens were landing and killing people. And that really got some upset, and they armed themselves and went out in the countryside searching for aliens. And a few people had heart attacks and such. I think the government in '54 recalled that episode and wanted to keep it as hushed up as possible.
Okay, Paul, I'm gonna rewind a little bit. I'm gonna start with a couple of questions here, because there's some things that hit me right between the eyes that I absolutely have to get out here, and that's this. Eisenhower is meeting with these aliens, and obviously they show him some things that are automatically overwhelming. But as the President of the United States, and the first thing that comes to mind is, okay, these guys just glanced into your backyard and automatically said, well, we're concerned, one, about your defensive capabilities. We have a real problem with it. And the fact that it's polluting your world, but it has the potential to pollute other worlds as well, because obviously you're unleashing something here that is going to not only destroy your environment, but can destroy others, obviously. it sounds to me like there was probably a little bit more than just, keep it on the down low, but maybe Eisenhower might have made a deal with these guys.
That is one rumor that I put in the book, that a treaty was formed and signed asking them to kind of stay aloof and stay in observance of Earth, which they obviously had been since they spoke English and knew about our atomic testing program. They'd obviously been here for some time and knew what was going on. And about 8 or 9 days after the meeting, there was the Castle Bravo detonation in the Bikini Atoll in the Pacific. And it was an enormous environmental disaster, far worse in megatons and damage than American scientists thought was going to happen. And Eisenhower had kind of egg on his face in the scandal afterwards. And it makes you think, were the aliens aware that we were playing with fire like kids with matches, and that we were going to do this damage even further with the atomic detonation program? But they did express this, and they wanted a treaty formed. And when I tried to find out more about this treaty, you've probably read or seen about it in books. Mm-hmm. I typed in Eisenhower alien agreement in the old Google search engine, and it came back and it said 10-year agreement. And I'm thinking, where did this come from? I couldn't find any more on 10-year agreement. But you know what I found? 10 years later, February 19th, 1964, Lyndon Johnson gets on the phone to Dwight Eisenhower in his retirement. They talk, and Johnson hops on a plane and flies all the way out there to Palm Springs and spends the next 2 days with Eisenhower in meetings behind closed doors. There were 2 Air Force Ones on the tarmac. Something kind of strange was going on because Johnson had no vice president. He had taken over a few months earlier from the Kennedy assassination.
Right.
So why did he have to go all the way out on the exact 10-year anniversary of this agreement? It's very suspicious. Johnson also went on the 14th anniversary, exact date, February 19th, 1968, to meet with Eisenhower in Palm Springs. And there's even photographs of the 2 men together before they held these private meetings. And it just makes you think that perhaps stories of a treaty are valid and that treaty need to be renewed or at least reviewed, and to see if we wanted to change any of it or end it or amend it, and that this is what a president would meet with the man in charge back in 54 on the exact same date when maybe the treaty would be starting to run out, or it would trigger a clause where something would happen and they needed to talk about it. So it's terribly suspicious. And that's where we get to February 19th again for Mr. Nixon.
Okay. Again, let me stop you, because there's the other thing that's hitting me right between the eyes is you mentioned that the aliens can cloak. And when we talk about modern day defense, and keep in mind, we'll talk about the 70s here for a second, because one of the first things to ever cloak was the SR-71 Blackbird. The plane has this technology that mirrors cloaking, that it mirrors the function of cloaking, that it can become invisible to radar, it can become invisible to sight. At least that's my understanding. So in there, what I'm going to suggest here is that, and you're talking about 10-year anniversary, treaty re-upping, another 4 years later, treaty re-upping. To me, that suggests that there are ongoing talks with aliens, that there's ongoing talks about potential maybe weapons trading or technology trading. Did you come across that in any of your research?
There was a document from 1989, a Defense Intelligence Agency briefing document that was leaked in 2017. I received permission to print it up in my book. It's actually now in the appendix of both books, the Nixon and the Eisenhower books. And in it, it talks about Eisenhower really did go to Palm Springs and then to Edwards Air Force Base, and he formed a treaty. He had 3 different meetings over about a year's time with these human-like aliens. And they formed this treaty and signed it. Of course, it was apparently not ratified by Congress, as most treaties have to be, but This was considered top secret. In the agreement, they said the aliens would receive some technology and we would get some of their technology in exchange for like peaceful relations, no great upsetting the apple cart. We're not going to do anything to them, and they're not going to do anything to us, but in private, we'll have these exchanges. So I'm thinking plant and animal specimens and our latest scientific, like nanotechnology or whatever, was exchanged back and forth. And we could have received things that changed the world, but we don't really know. They weren't specified in this document, which I believe is authentic. And I've talked to a few other UFO researchers, and they think it's authentic. So that's an example of what Eisenhower would take the time to agree to, and other presidents would have to keep a little check on. What are we sending to them? Are we getting something of equal value in return? Are they reneging on their deal? But part of the problem is that apparently there are other races coming here, and they're not as friendly and human-like. They're somewhat scary. And we think of some as these like biorobot type gray aliens with big bulbous heads and big black eyes, as reputed to have crashed in my hometown of Cape Girardeau, Missouri in April of 41. Mm-hmm. And then there's very similar, like at Roswell. And then, as you have mentioned, there are stories of big, tall, blonde, Scandinavian or Nordic-looking human-like beings, and possibly reptilian and still others. So if you form an agreement with one race, I'm sure all the others are like, well, we can come in here and maybe do whatever we want, abduct people, and look them over, put them back roughly, or put an implant or something in. It's kind of like opening a Pandora's box. When you do an agreement with one race, what about all the others? So it's a murky area, but I do think a treaty was signed by both sides, and it's so tough to enforce. There's a man named Don Phillips who worked for Skunk Works out in California. Okay. He said, I was working on top secret equipment on something like stealth bombers or something like that. And they said they gave me the file that mentioned, to his astonishment, Eisenhower met with these aliens, and this is where we got this technology in an agreement. He said, I read the document, could barely believe it. And Eisenhower says in the document, he's reported to have told the aliens, you're so advanced, there's no way we can stop you. You know, he candidly blurted this out to the aliens when they were having one or two or three meetings. So I looked up the dates in that document for 2 meetings. There are specific dates given. And by golly, Eisenhower had some openings in his schedule for those days. I put that all in my book, where it's at least possible Holloman Air Force Base in New Mexico was another meeting site. And Art Campbell, the late UFO researcher, did a lot of good work showing that people said, yes, Eisenhower did come here one day in, I think, February of 55, and he did gather everyone on the base afterwards and swore them to secrecy. There was a big theater at the base where everyone sat down and took this solemn oath. And in those days, you respectfully did as you were told, especially by your popular military commander-in-chief. So it's looking more and more like these things did happen, and gradually, I think, got covered up, locked away, kind of lost to younger generations taking over the American government. I'm sure there's people in government who mean well now and say, well, we don't have any proof of any aliens, because you haven't been seen or shown this material, you know, and you don't know the whole facts. It's being kind of locked up to this day. It wouldn't surprise me if more leaked out on this. I tried to put as many sources as I could in my book, and sometimes I get little tidbits of information from people who write in. I was on a talk show once, and a man called in and said, Paul, you're right. I can't tell you too many facts, but I work for the government, and we had a crash of a UFO, alien technology, and it had a communications device on board. And the American scientists took this, and they figure out through, I believe, high-frequency radio waves and such, binary code, how to communicate with the aliens. So I'm sure one of your questions is, how did Eisenhower have this meeting set up? You know, the scientists and the military knowing in advance where to go. Right. And it was apparently through this communications device that was taken off a ship, and they utilized it, and they figured out how to send out the messages, and they felt this race hasn't invaded us. They haven't attacked us. They do appear to be friendly. I think they were. Who knows? They may still be around. I've read in another military document, the Army Special Manual 101 of April 1954, which was probably taking some information from the February 19th encounter from Eisenhower, said that there were human-like aliens who were coming here. And another race were these bulbous-headed grays. So this confirms again, they said the human-like creatures just had a little fuzz on their heads, maybe a slightly grayish-yellow skin tone.
Okay.
And they were almost human-like that. You could walk down the street and maybe not notice. And I'm thinking maybe they had expanded nostrils or chest or lungs or diaphragm for breathing a different atmosphere on their planet. But that's what the test pilot said all along. They looked very much like human beings. And it all kind of fits together now when you read these reports of scientists speculating that through all the latest information they can put together that there are other human races on other planets. And I'm sure some are in like Stone Age development, cavemen, and some are maybe back in the 1910s or 20s and first learning automated vehicles and polluting the atmosphere, and others may be far more advanced than humans and have already spent hundreds of years, if not thousands, in a space program, developing their ability to cross the universe, perhaps through wormholes, time tunnels, dimensional travel, that sort of thing. So it becomes more and more realistic when you put this all together.
Okay, so Paul, let me ask you this. I know you said that the aliens tried to forewarn President Eisenhower that there are other races out there. Were they trying to warn them that there was a danger with these other races? And was it that Eisenhower wouldn't hear it? Or was he overwhelmed to the point where, you know what, I can only deal with you at this point?
Yeah, I think that was the case. That I don't know how detailed they got on other races, but they said we're willing to give you an education for the people of Earth, a program to help you get acclimated to there could be like Star Trek, a federation of other advanced beings who meet in peace and get along and do trade between planets, and they have diplomats and all that sort of thing. And it may not be that much of a fantasy that Gene Roddenberry put together in the 60s. You know what else he had on that show? Cloaking devices that would make their ship invisible. Yep. That was a couple of the best Star Trek episodes, or a movie, in which the evil bad guys have gotten control of the cloaking device and cloak their warships and go after the good guys. So there's all kinds of complicating factors in where you can understand a lot of this was swept under the rug and hushed up at the time. It could unnerve a lot of people then, and maybe a few people to this day.
Boy, you bring up a lot of questions here, Paul. Do you believe?
We only have so much time.
I know. Let me ask you this. Well, let's stay on that Star Trek vibe here for a second. Do you believe that Hollywood was let in on the secret at any time? Do you believe filmmakers like Steven Spielberg are in on it fully?
Spielberg said he was advised by none other than the great UFO researcher, Dr. J. Allen Hynek. And in reading an article from 1982 on this test pilot talking about Eisenhower really did meet with aliens, he really was there, and I was there, it mentions in the article, we went to J. Allen Hynek, and he said he was quite familiar with the Eisenhower story. Hynek was Spielberg's advisor for Close Encounters. And what was that? It was an air base out west with air base officials greeting landed aliens at night, exactly like the Eisenhower story. I think Spielberg knew plenty. There was almost every element of the Eisenhower tale except the president himself in Close Encounters. Friendly, human-like aliens, although they were shown as tiny little beings, not quite the size of humans. By the way, that Air Army manual that mentions there's at least 4 different races coming here, the human-like race was about 5 feet tall at most. And they were fairly well developed, fairly well muscled, and always polite and seemed educated and friendly. Like these were our best options to speak to, instead of maybe some other unknowns or creatures that might have no empathy, no sympathy for human life. They just come here and take specimens or look people over, callously and no regard for your feelings or whether they are hurting you or not. And that's where we get so many alien abduction stories where it sounds kind of painful and unpleasant. They were put back. They lived through the experience,
Yeah.
But that was another race entirely. And so who knows how many? I've heard as many as a dozen could be coming here. And this is another reason why the government doesn't want to tell us to this day. It's a little overwhelming, and we don't own our skies. You see orbs and flying discs and patterns or formations of objects flying around and craft that are recorded sometimes by people with their cell phones or video cameras, and it's making headlines and going viral on the internet. And there's almost no way the government can stop that now. They're in a bit of a quandary as to how to handle this situation in today's world. Would we really panic? I don't know. Maybe a few people would, but I think we're far better braced up for this now in mainstream media, TV, movies, magazines, books. There's a lot of alien type science fiction or semi-science fiction as Star Trek and Steven Spielberg go.
I don't know, Paul. I look at today's society and I see how reactionary we are and how quick to anger we are. And I honest to God, Paul, I think there's a section of humanity that would absolutely lose their ever-loving mind and go attack an alien if they thought that.
Yeah, it's another problem in that a lot of people are armed and trigger happy now.
Yep.
And we have a lot of bacteria, germs, disease, pandemics, and it's not wise for aliens now to step down and try to talk to people. It's worse than in 1954. It was safer for them. There were fewer people armed and ready to fire, but I'm sure that is always a thought for any advanced race. That is it safe? It reminds me of there was a little thing on the internet of aliens cruising past planet Earth, and it says, "Roll your windows up. This is not a safe place." As they go by, and it's kind of true. From their point of view, it may not be too safe to come here.
I think in 1954, people were more neighborly, to be honest with you.
Yes.
I think
It was a much more polite society, fewer ammunition passed around. And I think folks were starting to wake up, like the movie The Day the Earth Stood Still, and a few other kind of B movies. And they were interested in all these UFO sightings making the papers. It was more of a friendly, innocent atmosphere back then than today.
Yeah. And, if I don't know, maybe if there was something that looked more like us that stepped out of a ship, then maybe, they'd put the gun down. But I think if something stepped out that looked more like a gray or a reptilian, I think they'd be quick to fire, just out of fear.
And could an advanced race put on a human-like face or facade?
Yeah.
And it turns out to be, a Trojan horse, that they do not have friendly intent. And I'm sure that was something running through Eisenhower's mind and probably why he had it recorded. And if you've ever seen The 11th Green by Christopher Munch, a filmmaker who did a whole movie on Eisenhower recalling the time he met with aliens, and one of the things they showed was the cameraman recording it all. I think that was a very wise move, and I made it part of my book. That there was a filmmaker who made the news in Palm Springs during Eisenhower's visit because he was like an exact double. He looked just like Eisenhower, and they noted this in the paper at the time. And I'm thinking he was imported special in case the media needed to be diverted, or they would send out the phony Eisenhower to say, "Hello, greetings," in case they thought there was going to be trouble. He would be the patsy to go out and maybe get blasted or kidnapped or something. But it all worked out. There was no secret replacing of Eisenhower as president. That was the real deal. He was a real good man. All America should still be proud of Dwight Eisenhower, the first president to earn a pilot's license. Did you know that? He knew all about planes and how to fly them, and he was like the perfect president for aliens to land and speak to intelligently and show off their craft and what it could do. And he was suitably impressed. I'm sure they shot up in the air and zipped around back and forth and spun around and landed silently. I'm told that one story has it, I don't know if it's valid, the aliens offered, would you like to come in and look around? And Eisenhower said, no, I don't think I'm going to allow my people to do that. I'm not going in there. But they were Eisenhower allowed to pick up one of the craft and lug it around. And he said it was amazingly lightweight.
Really?
Yeah, one of these discs, the men picked it up and lugged it around and then put it back down. It was nothing. So that's one story, and it's just the most exciting, wonderful story. A U.S. president having a friendly conversation with these beings from another world. I'd like to think they're still coming here and they still care. I wouldn't mind meeting them myself, but I'll point out I've never seen a UFO or an alien, written about them, and I have people come up to me and tell me their stories. And they see them, and I'm thinking, what about me?
Right.
I never get to see anything.
Well, and that's a very good question. We do have a lot going on right now with the Aero meetings, and it's kind of you help us find them type of attitude. And it kind of feels like we're playing a shell game here, like the government's doing this. Well, we don't know. We'll take your suggestions as to what you think this is.
Yeah,
we're being
exactly.
glad-handed, Paul, is what it is.
And when they make statements, they're not under oath.
Right.
And they keep them kind of generic and say, unidentified, unexplained. Mm-hmm. And, they're very vague about some things. I understand there'll be more meetings soon, NASA and other things that will go on. I'm not optimistic we'll get any great revelations of disclosure. There is a rumor of a 30-minute video of an alien that crash landed in Argentina or South America somewhere, Varginha.
Something like that.
I'd love to see that leak. Yeah, that would be exciting. Although we may have to count on other countries to come through with information, because America still doesn't want to tell you even a little drib like, okay, we have been visited and there have been crashes in the 40s, and that's all we can tell you. A little what they call limited disclosure or limited hangout. That could come someday, but even I'm not optimistic at this point.
And the Navy has taken all videos now off the table. They say they're no more releasing of videos, and they say because it does risk security. There's top secret things that are on these videos that they don't want to risk releasing to our enemies. To me, that means that there are top secret things in those videos, meaning there's tech in those videos that they don't want the enemies of our country to know about.
Yeah, to study, right?
That's
to
right.
Study and maybe be able to copy or fathom better than we are scientists.
That's right.
And I can understand that at least as a halfway decent excuse. Did you see the 60 Minutes interview a couple of years ago in which they interviewed these Air Force test pilots or pilots that go up every day? And one of them said, we see these things every time we go up in the air, every day.
Yeah.
Something unusual, something that does not explain or is explained by human technology is there for a little bit and then flits off at the blink of an eye. And that's not Chinese or Russian or Korean or Iranian. And they admitted these things on camera. And since then, it's been pretty quiet, but it was a revelation that did not trigger a panic. Well, now, America and the world took it pretty calmly.
I also saw a video though too, Paul, and this is what intrigues me even more, of a fighter pilot who said sometimes when we see a campfire off in the distance, we'll take our own tech, our own plane in there, and we'll play UFO with them. So in other words, they have the tech already. They'll come in, they'll stop the plane right over a campfire, they'll play UFO with them, and then they'll fly away real quick.
I'd love to see that.
Yeah, so they'll do everything a UFO will do with someone who thinks they're having a genuine sighting, and it's not. It's a fighter pilot who's playing with you. So,
I'm redoing my Cape Girardeau UFO crash called Mo 41, my original book, and updating it with some new information and putting it all together. And it should be out in hardback later this year. And in it, there are documents that talk about President Roosevelt wanted that technology from the crash applied to our weaponization program, our weapons of war. We've got to win this Second World War that was raging in the aftermath of the Cape Girardeau crash. And it just goes to show you right from the start, we wanted to take advantage of what landed. Roosevelt wrote these new celestial wonders that have come to us. Well, we can tell what that was now because it was considered non-terrestrial science and technology. That's what the Roosevelt memos mention. And that's not meteors. That's not technology that we can apply to the atom bomb and maybe other propulsion systems in our planes over the next decades. I think it really is real, and it started with Cape Girardeau, and we're seeing the results, as you mentioned just now, of applying it successfully. That's pretty cool, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, everything from the technology of drones, I mean, you know, and what they're doing with drones to AI to, I mean, we can even go as far as the things that are used in Havana syndrome, microwaves, and things that are being used in spy technology, it's all been developed very quickly, like, you know, within the last 50 to 70 years, and it's all coming very fast, and I know I'm stuttering here, but it's coming fast and furious, and it's coming at a pace that I think we're all not ready for. You know,
are we ready for artificial intelligence? Are we fully grasping what this can do now and deceiving so many people? I've been listening online to some Beatles songs, but the Beatles did not record these songs. People have been applying their voices to other music and making it sound like the beautiful Beatles' voices harmonizing together like they've reformed. And that's just one small step in AI, creating deep fake videos to make it look like your political enemy is drunk or crazy or saying terrible things that are absolutely untrue. 60 Minutes did a report and showed a video of Tom Cruise playing the guitar and singing.
Yep.
The whole thing was a complete fake, a fraud. It looks so convincing that we're going into a very frightening future where people can be easily misled and hopefully not start a conflagration, a world war, or even trigger these nuclear weapons through an artificial intelligence program, or make people think we're being invaded by aliens when we're not. It's scary.
It is.
It's not really my kind of world. I wish we could go back and put the genie in the bottle, but it's too late.
That's true. That's very true. Let's take our break here, Paul. When we come back, let's get to the other part of this, and that is after President Eisenhower has worked out the treaty, as far as we know, we come to the second part of this, and that is his vice president, Richard Nixon, has become president. And in February of 1973, there's a golf outing, and a golf outing which becomes quite peculiar because Jackie Gleason's involved. And there's talk of dead aliens. And we'll pick it up from there when we come back on the other side of the break. Our guest is Paul Blake Smith, and there's two books out there that we're going to point you to. We have links to them in the description of this program. The first one is President Eisenhower's Close Encounters. The second one is the Nixon-Gleason Alien Encounter. We'll be talking about that when we come back right here on the best in paranormal podcasting. This is Darkness Radio. Welcome back to the best in paranormal programming. This is Darkness Radio. I'm your host, Tim Dennis. Our guest is author Paul Blake Smith. Two books out there that you're going to want to pick up. We have a link in the description of this program, President Eisenhower's Close Encounters and the Nixon-Gleason Alien Encounter. Again, there are links in the description of this program. Paul, we're in February of 1973. President Richard M. Nixon has went from vice president to running against Kennedy, not so successfully, and then eventually becomes, well, that's back in the past, but he ran against Kennedy not so successfully. He was
Eisenhower's vice president.
I'm sorry, Eisenhower's vice president.
He
ran
replaced Johnson as president in January of '69.
That's right. Yep.
And when he did, he immediately bought a house in Key Biscayne, Florida, on the waterfront, and put in a chopper pad. And he flew 55 times down to Homestead Air Force Base south of Miami and would shuttle back, 55 times to visit his Key Biscayne home. He would take a chopper from Homestead to his Key Biscayne home and back and forth. He loved taking Marine One over the city. It was so much faster than limousine travel, having to go in a convoy with all your aides and Secret Service. Just hop aboard the chopper. So Homestead Air Force Base was wiped out in the 1990s by a terrible hurricane, destroyed almost everything. But back in Nixon's day, he went there over and over and over, and apparently took one night, February 19th, 1973, Richard Nixon's golf buddy, Jackie Gleason, to Homestead Air Force Base, where they were looking into golf matters. Alien matters. It was said to be a golf vacation. Does that remind us of anything? That Eisenhower flew for a supposed golf vacation. So that was Nixon's cover story as well. And he also ducked out at night while the press was asleep or doing something else, distracted. And he went to an Air Force base, flew in like Eisenhower flew into Edwards Air Force Base. And this time, he brought a friend. Now, you would say, well, what kind of security clearance did Jackie Gleason, the comedian, Ralph Cramden have? And, of course, the answer is none. But by February of 1973, Nixon had won overwhelming re-election in a landslide of historic proportion. And every U.S. president had died. He was the only American president left alive. J. Edgar Hoover was dead. Allen Dulles was dead. So many great figures of America's past were now deceased, and Nixon's king of the mountain. He had not been brought down by the Watergate scandal, but his burglars had been caught and were demanding hush money. Now, that's a key factor, I think, in this story. Why would Nixon import Jackie Gleason? Jackie had a standing offer for years. I'll give $1 million to anyone who can show me the proof for alien visitation on planet Earth. He craved it. He was obsessed with UFOs and aliens. So I think we can put two and two together. Nixon wanted at least $1 million to cover his Watergate burglars' hush fund for their legal fees and such. And Jackie Gleason spent freely. He made up to $14 million a year. $1 million would have been next to nothing. He made movies, TVs. He made his own record albums. His shows were on in repeats. He was making a fortune. So it's not difficult to put two and two together, especially when you consider Nixon and Gleason shared the same lawyer, Herbert Kalmbach, who was caught handing out bundles of cash in the Watergate scandal, and he went to jail for obstruction of justice. So we can see this very easily coming together as a case of Nixon saying, is that $1 million offer still good? I need the money. And Jackie said, sure. Now, we don't have a recording of that, and there's nothing on paper, but I think we can successfully put two and two together. And that's why Nixon said, I'm going to do whatever I want. I'm commander-in-chief, and you don't talk back to me if I want to bring my golf buddy into this restricted top-secret air base. They did, and Jackie went home that night and told his wife almost everything.
Oh, wow. Okay, so if push comes to shove, it's a campaign contribution.
Right. Paying for that 72 campaign because Nixon had no upcoming campaign.
There you go. Right. So, boy, oh boy, it's another thing to be a friend of the president and just say, hey, you got any fun little secrets I can see? Although it's highly unethical. When you think about it, who says that aliens are real anyways? If you've got a buddy with you and you're the president, well, he's just flying along. We're going on a golf outing, but, we're just going to go stay somewhere overnight. We just happen to be taking Marine One with us,
Right. And there's photographs. I put one up online this morning of Nixon and Gleason together that very afternoon. Nixon took his Marine One helicopter and flew to Jackie's golf course home, where there was a helipad right near Jackie's house. And he spoke to the press. Nixon and Gleason rode around in this golf cart. Nixon talked to the press about the end of the Vietnam War, which was making him extremely popular in the polls. He was riding high with almost no substantial opposition of any kind in this country. He was like, they called him King Richard. Mm-hmm. And he decided to take advantage of this by coming back later at night. I think he sent his chopper pilot to pick Jackie up after a phone call to alert him. Jackie walked right out to the chopper pad on the golf course where he'd gone earlier that day and got in the chopper and flew by helicopter across Miami to Homestead Air Force Base, where I believe Nixon was waiting for him. This is where we get to Beverly Gleason, Jackie's estranged wife at the time, gave 3 different interviews, one in 1974 when she was separated but still legally married to Jackie. Okay. And she mentioned this story, and it got into the Enquirer, just a brief mention. And Jackie read that, and he exploded with anger. He said, "You're never to talk of this again." But 9 years later, Beverly wrote her own article and said, "I'm going to write a tell-all book on my ex-husband." And here's one of the stories. She wrote this herself for the Enquirer and said, "Jackie came home late one night while he was hosting his golf tournament and said, 'Nixon showed me the bodies of these dead aliens at Homestead Air Force Base,' because it was near midnight. He came home pale and haggard. He was all shook up emotionally. And she said, 'Where have you been?' And he had to give an answer, so he just blurted out the truth. He was stunned by what he had seen at the base. So she said, he told me there were 4 dead aliens stretched out on 4 examining tables in this lab that was guarded at the door by an armed security guard. Nixon and I went in there, and he showed me these 4 dead bodies. And he said they looked like maybe they'd been embalmed, that maybe there had been a crash nearby. That was, I think, speculation on Jackie's part, but it gives us a clue. And he said they were strangely short, kind of dwarfish, like 2 feet tall, perhaps a little taller, and big pointy ears and big bug eyes. They were not the Cape Girardeau crash UFO aliens. Okay. They were not the Eisenhower UFO aliens. This was a different race, which matches perfectly the Hopkinsville UFO alien attack of 1955, in which the Sutton family felt they were being attacked by these strange dwarfish aliens with big pointy ears and big bug eyes. They were the same exact description of what Jackie said he saw laying dead on a set of tables in a lab at the base. So Beverly wrote this story, and again, it was printed, and Jackie exploded with anger, said, "You're never to do this again. You're not to talk about it." And Jackie was asked over and over, "Is this story true? What your wife's saying in the Enquirer twice?" And he refused to answer. He said no comment. He wouldn't deny the story. He could have easily said, "This is a bunch of garbage. This is nonsense." Yeah. And I've read elsewhere that Jackie in his personal life had some friends had nothing to do with UFOs, but they'd read this story and they asked him. And Jackie only said, "Nixon showed me the proof. That's all I want to say. Nixon showed me the proof." So it backs up what Beverly Gleason said. In 2003, she gave her final interview, and it was printed, and she did not retract the story. She didn't embellish it or change it. It was printed in a Grant Cameron UFO website, and I put so much of it in my book that you can read, where she said Nixon was good friends with Jackie. She knew that they went golfing together, and they had been golfing together for like 10 years prior to the encounter in 73. Wow. So it again holds together that Nixon did this bold act in the middle of the night, and that who's going to stop him? Nobody. He was the king, and it's good to be king, isn't it?
Well, yeah. I mean, but here's where, if I'm Nixon, I guess I can get being bold because you're on top of the world. Your approval rating is up there, and it's Jackie Gleason. I mean, even if he says something, he's a comedian. No one's going to believe him. They'll think it's a joke. right?
Jackie was so obsessed with UFOs, even in one episode of The Honeymooners, he puts on this crazy costume and announces, I am the man from space. He even played a little alien on his show.
Yeah.
In his personal life, he was so obsessed, he gathered together over 1,700 books and periodicals on the paranormal, heavy on UFOs. You can still see the books at a special reading room at the University of Miami. This obsession was real. They said he would come into Miami area bookstores. I want this, gave him his address and said, start sending these directly to me. And he was nuts about the subject. He would call up the authors and quiz them intensely about these UFO stories in their books. And then he'd sometimes call up the UFO eyewitnesses and ask them, important questions. He wanted to know every last detail. He was so obsessed. He even built his own circular UFO house, they call it. It's still there to this day, a big round house that was built in the weeks, designed in the weeks after the Eisenhower encounter of 54. It took several years to piece together, but where was it pieced together? In an airplane hangar, just like Eisenhower's encounter. And it was all shipped and assembled at the Peekskill, New York cliffside site that Jackie had picked out. So once the house was finished, it had these big bay windows, and guests could feel like they're riding in a spaceship looking out over the valley below. And it must have cost like $1 million to build this thing, and it was nothing to Jackie. He outfitted it with telescopes, a Tesla coil, which was allegedly used to contact aliens like in 1899 or something by Nikolai Tesla.
Yeah.
And Jackie, according to his own stepson, had a whole room, a bedroom in their house in Miami, crammed full of ham radios where he would listen in and try to contact, people from other worlds, people in this world, listen to the space program going on in Miami area, just up the coast.
Yep.
He was obsessed. He wanted that contact. And it just is amazing that a well-rounded, intelligent man and such a brilliant performer was so over the top about alien visitation. And I think he kept badgering Nixon until he finally gave in. One small factor also is Jackie's birthday was coming up a few days after February 19th. What do you get for your friend who has everything in life except one thing? I want to see the aliens. So I think Nixon took the money and here's your birthday present. Here you go. Take a look and keep your mouth shut. Jackie said he was sworn to secrecy outside the lab when the tour was over. And naturally, he blew through that night when he blurted out where he had been.
Right.
He looked so pale and ghastly. His wife said that he would thunder angrily at the government for days, if not weeks after this event. He was so upset. They've got the proof. They've got the evidence. I've seen it. Nixon showed it to me. And yet they keep denying we're being visited, and they ridicule people who say they've seen UFOs. It made him really angry, his wife said. And then he would alternate into a giddy, kind of excited, happy little boy because Nixon showed me the proof alone. Me, all people on the planet, I finally got to see the proof, the hard proof I've wanted all my life. And then he would swing back the other way. He went through these mood swings, and it just gives you another indication Beverly was not kidding. She didn't just make this up. And that Jackie never denied it, that it really impacted him that night where he was so pale and shook up, and he drank more and smoked more, and I think he ate less and slept less. But with Jackie, of course, he drank and smoked a pretty fair amount. He had a kind of cast iron stomach for that.
Yeah.
But it really shook him up so much. He didn't work in the movies for years, pretty much till Smokey and the Bandit, where he was hilarious as this bigoted old sheriff who chased Burt Reynolds around. He improvised a lot of that dialogue himself.
Yes.
It's so funny. I read Burt Reynolds' book, and he said Jackie would show up and do these characters, improvise, tell jokes. He had us on the floor laughing during the filming of the story, showing that he was still sharp. He was still with it. He was not, whacked out on UFOs all the time, just in his private life.
That begs the question here, Paul. Although Jackie would go from almost euphoric at the fact that his friend had shown him that there was proof that there was alien life, to almost angry at the fact that it was being held from the American public. Did he ever have the thought of maybe Nixon pulled one on me. That
I'm
maybe
sure that must have run through his head. Like Nixon could be a little devious, but he had these bodies laid out. I doubt if Jackie touched them, but he said they looked like they'd been embalmed on these examining tables. That's going through a lot of elaborate ruse. For instance, Nixon could have said, "Come on over to my house, Jackie, in Key Biscayne. I'll show you these bodies," if they had been fakes. Why bother to go to Homestead Air Force Base? But there was a special lab there, like a morgue, and they looked like they were going to be examined or cut open, and that helps add to the story. Whereas Nixon could have put together like, hey, Hollywood, make up these dummies for me, and we're going to trick Jackie as a joke or something like that.
But if you were going to pull a rib on your buddy, I mean, if you're totally going to rib your buddy, the best way to do it is you could have FBI or CIA guys, makeup guys, put together an alien body or a couple of alien bodies, and then put them in a lab somewhere, and just say, "Hey guys, I got Gleason. I'm going to play golf with him. It's his birthday coming up. Let's totally rib him and tell him that we've got alien bodies."
In theory, that's an idea, but have you ever heard Richard Nixon playing a silly prank on anyone? He was super serious and obsessed with power and politics. He was not a fun guy.
True.
He even gave up golfing in his retirement, said this was a stupid game, threw his clubs down and marched off a golf course once. That's how serious he was, even about golf. That no one reports him being a prankster trying to put Gleason on. And how long would you remain friends with Jackie, his financial supporter, and his golf buddy, if he pulled a stunt like this? So I doubt if they were fakes. They do sound very strange, at least according to Beverly Gleason's memory. We're counting on her to have recalled what he said, but she did write this out in an article and spoke about it in 2 different interviews and never changed her story. I think she's still alive, and I tried to find her. I can't find her. There's been no tell-all book, you notice. No big interviews in the press. She doesn't want to talk to anyone. I think she got a financial agreement from the Gleason estate, and she's going to keep clammed up probably to her grave.
You know, Paul, it's interesting stuff, I tell you.
Yeah, it sure is.
It's one of those things where you wonder if it goes beyond Jackie Gleason, how many famous people get pulled aside by the presidents that we've had, like say within the last 20 years, 25 years. And did Clinton pull somebody aside and say, "Hey, you want to see a dead alien body?" Or even President Obama or Bush, either of the Bushes, did somebody pull somebody aside and say, "Hey, want to see a dead alien body?" Even Bush Senior, I mean, he even had a sense of humor,
He did.
So, I mean, the fact of the matter is there are presidents there that I can see doing this, that could maybe bring somebody in from Hollywood or bring in a famous friend and say, "Hey, if you ever been curious about, we got,
you would think a president would be exposed, that somebody would talk and really embarrass a president when they would reveal such a story, and nobody ever has. Like I say, Nixon was just as a serious, kind of quirky kind of guy. He read through a lot of briefing papers. That's what he was doing in Key Biscayne. They said, even his own aides, we didn't get a lot of work done. It was strange that we kept going down to Key Biscayne, and Nixon would read all these briefing papers and spend hours alone not speaking to anyone. He was so serious that they would go out on a boat, and he'd just sit there. He wouldn't even fish. He was not a fun guy to be around, quite frankly. Let's give Mr. Nixon a break. He had the Cold War. Russia and China were opposing America.
Yeah.
Cuba just off our shores. The Vietnam War was going on, a hot war. He had a tremendous load on his plate, and he just didn't have time for goofing around and pulling stunts. So I'm pretty sure those were not fake aliens, and he didn't say, "Gotcha, it's all a ruse." And remember, Jackie was all shook up and pale. He believed it, and his wife believed it. So It's an interesting theory, but I don't think it quite holds water.
Yeah, I hear you. An interesting story nonetheless. Folks, again, the two books are in the description of this program. We've got links to them and encourage you to go get them right now. President Eisenhower's Close Encounters and the Nixon-Gleason Alien Encounter. Man, I tell you, Paul, such interesting stories and wow, good stuff. Good stuff.
It is fascinating. I heard two guys on a podcast once say, "Is this the coolest story ever or what?" And I think it is. I also want to point out to your viewers that I don't put in wacko theories, conspiracy stuff I heard somewhere. I try to be discerning. I'm a bit cynical and disbelieving myself, believe it or not.
Okay.
And I put in a ton of information, like a mountain of circumstantial evidence, sources and resources. It's not a flimsy, I made this up type book. I got a lot of facts, and I try to present it in a serious manner, and it's gotten a lot of good reviews. So I hope you'll like it and give it a chance and keep an open mind. And I think you'll come to the same conclusion I did, is that these events really did happen, and they're being covered up to this day.
All right. Before we go, Paul, one more question for you here, and that's this. We touched on a little bit earlier in the program. We were talking about disclosure, the fact that the government keeps maybe toying around with us a little bit here. But do you see disclosure happening in your lifetime and my lifetime? Do you think it'll happen?
Probably not, unless something unforeseen happens. And by that, I mean someone leaking something shocking that can't be denied anymore. Okay. Someone hacking in. There was a fellow, Christopher something, in England who said he hacked into information about UFOs, and he really had the government come down hard on him. If it was a lie, a hoax, would the government lock this guy up and threaten him and all this sort of thing? So that's always an X factor, an unknown factor. What could happen? Even if the government doesn't officially want to reveal things, they may have their hand forced at times, let's say by multiple sightings at a football game, and everyone's got their video cameras and they're taking advantage of the access to something they see. It's difficult to tell in the future. Officially, I bet the cover-up continues. Okay. They've been covering it up for at least 80 years, but you never know what may come along and rattle some cages and force things in a different manner. I'll also point out quickly, there was a source who responded to MeTV, which had an online article about Nixon and Gleason. And they said, we welcome your comments. And a man wrote in, sounding quite knowledgeable. He said, oh, yes, Gleason was there. He went to the base. You could even see the airplane hangar they went to from the highway. Nixon did take him into the hangar. And this is not something Beverly Gleason said. But the author of this comment said, I happen to know Nixon took Gleason into a hangar on the base after seeing the bodies and showed him this live craft, circular silver disc that was being tethered down by cables in the airplane hangar. And I think this could be also something that could have shaken up Jackie. It would have been something he would have wanted to see, a real prize if it's real. Now, let's face it, anyone can make up a story on the internet. Mm-hmm. But the level of detail of what this man wrote about makes you think that maybe he was stationed at the base at that time. I was never able to track him down, but it's another aspect of the story that just keeps getting more and more fascinating. There was another famous comedian who played in the golf tournament, who was Jackie's golf partner all the time, and he may have figured in the air base visit too. It's conjecture on my part. I won't give away the name. You got to read the book to find out.
That sounds good. One last question, and that's this. I've always wondered what it is that's so dastardly that they keep this covered up. Do you think there's some sort of Faustian bargain with these aliens? There's something that we're giving up that's so dastardly that we can't let our people know about this deal?
It's possible that one or two races coming here have wicked, evil intent, and that we've managed to keep them at bay, and other aliens possibly keep them at bay. They use, I've heard planet Earth is considered like a wildlife sanctuary where you're allowed to look around, but don't get involved and don't mess with the human race. They're not advanced enough. And it's possible there's a couple of races that are kind of frightening. And the government doesn't want everyone to think that all aliens here are frightening or intimidating. We tend to lump things together. Oh, it's aliens. They're all the same. There could be various personalities, various types of races, various types of agendas when they come here. Some are just to look around, and some get more hands-on, and some have a very scary-looking appearance, if you believe some of these accounts, and some are very human-like and friendly. Frankly, those are the only ones I want to meet.
Yeah, right. Exactly. You got it. Folks, again, the books President Eisenhower's Close Encounters and the Nixon-Gleason Alien Encounter are available right now and available for you to purchase. We've got the links in the description of this program. We encourage you to go get it right now. Paul Blake Smith, thank you so much for being on the program.
Oh, it was my pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you. I want to thank Paul Blake Smith for being on Darkness Radio today, and be sure to go out and get those two books that we mentioned. Again, links in the description of today's program. Want to thank you guys so much for joining us this week for the programs. We had, again, a great week of shows, again, with Pro Bono on True Crime Tuesday and Jeff MacArthur and Paul Blake Smith today, and the two books that we were talking about today, both with the Nixon-Gleason affair and President Eisenhower's encounter. Some good topics. And again, if you have a topic that you want to hear on this show, email me, tim@darknessradio.com. I'm eager to hear what kind of things you want to hear on the program. And if you have a guest tip, please include that as well, and where you believe that you think I can get a hold of these people. It's one thing just to kind of throw out a guest idea. It's another to have an idea of where to get a hold of those people. If you have some sort of an idea or a contact form on a website, that would be helpful as well. So if you have that, pass it along if you would. We have some good shows coming up in the next few weeks here on Darkness Radio, and we look forward to bringing them to you. So again, if you enjoy what you're listening to, be sure to give us a 5-star review wherever you hear us, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you hear your podcasts. We'd appreciate that as well. Folks, I want to remind you to take care of yourself and each other. If you're out and about this weekend, and there's supposed to be some good summer weather from what I understand around the nation, be sure to help out maybe an elderly neighbor or a neighbor who might not be able to get around as well physically this weekend. Get out and enjoy the weekend, but as well help out someone who may not be able to get some chores done around the house. Do something for a neighbor, do something for someone out there who might not be able to be as physically mobile, and help them get some things done around the house as well. Help out a neighbor, help out a friend, help out a family member, and leave it a little bit better than what you found it. Just a little message from your friends here at Darkness Radio. Want to remind you once again, Parashare. We're taking Parashare submissions, and we're also taking the I Knew a Murderer submissions by submitting your stories to tim@darknessradio.com. Or if you go to our website, darknessradioshow.com, clicking on the blue button, you can leave a voice note. You have a 2-minute window in which to do so when you click on that blue button on the right-hand side of the website. Again, 2-minute window. But if you have a story that's a little bit longer than that, just click that blue button one more time, and I'll stitch those stories together, the 2-minute windows together, and we'll make it a 4-minute window, because I learned multiplication tables when I was in grade school. It's kind of a cool deal, huh? But do that, and we'll get your lovely voice on the air, or you can just simply submit an email to us, and we'll read those stories on the air. We'll look forward to that on Tuesday and Wednesday of next week. Again, have a great weekend, folks. We look forward to seeing you next week right here on the best in paranormal programming. Thank you so much for joining us. For Beer City Bruiser, for Mally Fox, and for Jessica Freeberg, I'm Tim Dennis. Thank you so much for being with us for another great week of Darkness Radio.